Well, that gospel passage is a really good segue into what I'd like to say next, which is sometimes Christians and those who believe in God can sound a little, or sometimes a lot, crazy. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But Saint Cuthbert, who was a Celtic saint, was on the island of Lindisfarne, and he was a very successful abbot. He was in charge of a monastery for many years, a very faithful man, led his community through a lot. But what Cuthbert desired more than anything was to be in solitude. Cuthbert wanted, and did so when he retired, he wanted to be alone so he could pray and fast. Now, that may sound a little nuts to some of us, but the praying and fasting, especially if you look back at the Old Testament, is symbolic of those who are seeking God. And when you want to be close to God, you have to shift your appetite. You have to shift your desires. So to pray and to fast is to draw closer and closer to God. So this is what Cuthbert did in his retirement and was blissfully happy, apparently, doing so. Now Solomon, in our Old Testament reading from today, we hear about Solomon who also wants to be close to the Lord. Solomon is asked by God in a dream, "What is it that you want?" Now remember, he is in line to be king, right? "What do you want?" says God. He could have said anything, but instead he says, basically, "I want to be like my dad. I want to be a man of faith and a servant to you, Lord. Give me a governing mind, right, to discern these things." And this pleases God, because Solomon also wants to connect with God. So again, from the outside, it may look a little weird, a little strange, but Solomon is very blessed by seeking out God in the way that he does. Now, to the gospel. John chapter 6. If you've been paying attention, all of August is spent in the lectionary in John chapter 6. Now, usually we jump around a little bit. Sometimes it's different chapters in the same gospel, but very rarely do we sit in one particular chapter. So over and over the last 3 weeks, and again next week, we hear about bread. I am the bread of life. I am the bread that came down from heaven. Jesus points out that their ancestors, ate manna, ate bread in the wilderness. But this is a different type of bread. He says earlier in chapter 6, "You believed that Moses gave you that bread. Actually, that bread was from God. And even though that bread was from God, Jesus is saying, I have come down from God also, but I have come down to be the bread in the flesh." Now, I really hope that makes some of you uncomfortable, right? Because here Jesus is talking about flesh and blood. And yes, this is a metaphor we hear every week in the Eucharist. Do this in remembrance of me, right? Drink my blood, eat my flesh, eat my body. It's a little strange. Again, those who believe in God can seem crazy on the outside. And to the Jews, this would have also been crazy talk, because Leviticus specifically says, do not drink the blood of an animal. So that definitely means don't drink the blood of humans. And here Jesus is saying over and over, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. What? What is Jesus talking about? So if you think about eating, You are literally, when you ingest something, you take it in, and it goes into your body and is closer to you than probably almost anything else in this world. Because it travels through your organs, through your intestine, all the nutrients are drawn out and go to different parts of the body where it's needed. But what else in your life are you that close to? When you have a good experience with food, it usually goes well. When you have a bad experience with food, it does not go well. Right? Because when something that close to you is bad, you know the rest. But when something that close to you is good, we are given life. We usually talk about it in the form of energy. Protein and carbohydrates give us energy. But what Jesus is saying is that this is more than just energy to get you until the next piece of bread. This is life. Now, there's a very famous theologian named John Zizioulas who said there really can be no true being without communion. And when you think about it, every Sunday, we come forward and we receive the bread and the wine in which we remember Jesus, his body and his blood. So we are literally communing with God. We are ingesting God, taking God into us. Now, if you want to talk about transubstantiation, then meet me after the service. So I won't go into those details today. But when we are at communion, we are very close to God. And it's that closeness that allows us to step into the fullness of life that Jesus is talking about. And I agree with Zizioulas. Without that, eating seems actually very empty. Life seems very empty to me without God. So I want you to think about this morning, when you come to communion, maybe take some extra time at the altar, at the rail, to pray, to just kneel with your hands open. And remember, you are receiving communion, right? We open our hands like this. We teach in confirmation class. We're not taking it necessarily. We're receiving communion. And when we do that, our posture is physically saying, I'm open. God, I'm here to receive whatever it is you have for me today. So as you come forward to the altar and kneel at the rail this morning or stand, I invite you to consciously think about opening your hands and receiving what God has for you. Now that may be challenging for some of us. That may feel very vulnerable. But I promise you, our God is kind and gentle. A God of great power who is kind and gentle. So I pray that as you come forward, you may have the courage to receive the connection that God desires to have with you today. Amen.